In this session, participants confront pressing global challenges that demand coordinated multilateral efforts for effective resolution. Distinguished panelists will illuminate key issues such as forced migration and international affairs, strategies for combating racism and hate speech, and global cooperation to preserve our planet and responsible and ethical AI development and deployment. From now on, this session's moderator, Professor Han Seung-mi, from the Graduate School of International Studies at Yonsei University, will lead the session. Professor Han, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone for coming here and joining our session. And also thank you very much for the panelists. This session aims at discussing four major issues that are having global challenges and that requires our pressing attention for global citizenship education and multilateral cooperation. So let me introduce first four distinguished panelists first, and then I will turn over the mic to them. Professor Rawan Ara is from the Department of Law, Societies, Justice, and University of Washington. She's a sociologist, and her main research focuses on how refugees' lives and life chances are inextricably tied to national and global policies. And she has published on numerous articles, but one of her main book is The Refugee System, a Sociological Approach. And then our second distinguished speaker is Professor Peter Nguru, and he's also ambassador of Kenya to UNESCO. And he has been Kenya's ambassador to UNESCO in Paris, France, and has served before that as the Deputy Vice Chancellor to Academic Affairs at St. Paul's University in Kenya. And his main research interests include leishmaniasis. I think it's very much biological focused research, and malaria vector control and treatment, higher education, and poverty alleviation. He has won numerous grants, but he is also a member of the Kenya National Academy of Science, and he's also served as a board member at the East African Communities East Teco and World Vision Kenya and Leicester Secondary School as well. And our third speaker is from University of Tokyo, Professor Ai Kitahara Hunt. She's the director at the Research Center of Sustainable Peace, and she teaches about human security program. Her research has been the experts. She's a member of the expert study group of the Future of Peace Operations for the UN Peacekeeping Ministerial 2025, and she has done numerous research on UN peace organization, operation, and also UN police, accountability, and human rights. She teaches human rights law, international humanitarian law, international criminal law, and human security and peace building as well. She has been in numerous places as an actual participant as well as an academician, and one of her distinguished publication holds holding UN police to account, individual criminal accountability of United Nations police personnel. And our last but not least, Professor Lee Sang-wook from Hanyang University. He is a physicist at first. He was a physics major, but he also studied philosophy of science, and he teaches at AI department as well as philosophy department at Hanyang University. He has been a member of AI ethics, standard setting committee, and has been ad hoc experts group of the drafting of the UNESCO recommendation of AI ethics in 2020. So now I will turn over the mics to each presenter, and first our Dr. Juan Arar, and she's going to talk about the Syrian case, refugee family case, right? Yes. Please.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's absolutely my pleasure to be here today and to share the stage with my colleagues. We only have a quick 5 minutes, so as a professor, I'm going to give you, a bite-sized lecture here that I think can get the conversation started around refugee issues. What I'm going to present draws from this book that I co-authored with David Fitzgerald called The Refugee System: A Sociological Approach. Now, I left this first slide intentionally blank because I want to invite you all to recall or remember how we often hear people discussing refugees and refugees as access to rights. Oftentimes in news headlines, especially let's say in the wake of the mass migration to Europe, we saw headlines comparing refugees to migrants. And in fact, the refugee migrant binary has been a central, let's say, theme in trying to understand how we understand refugees as human rights and what we might compare them to. Now, that binary is upheld not only in public rhetoric, but it also plays a role because it's useful for practitioners. So when we think about how do refugees gain access to rights, states provide a certain amount of rights for refugees because they make an exception for these folks. And so lawyers who are put in a position to advocate for people who might be seeking asylum are comparing refugees and migrants. So we see it in headlines, we see it through practitioners. You can also think about humanitarian support. So for example, you need to be able to count the number of refugees if you're going to provide, let's say, backpacks or access to seats in schools. And so you see this very clear divide in which people are placed into categories. However, as a sociologist, we are in a good position to think more about people's lived experiences that fall out of those categories. And that's what I want to discuss with you today. So I'd like to introduce you to this chart that we've called the Mobility Immobility Chessboard, which looks at a whole spectrum of categories of movement, which is not necessarily complete, but is much more dynamic. Thinking about degrees of movement, going from domestic movement to international movement, and to return as conceptualized as the longest route towards return. And also thinking about degrees of coercion there. So you can imagine degrees of coercion mapped against degrees of movement. Now, most of the people in the world would be considered voluntary non-migrants. So these are people who are staying where they were born. They're not migrants, they're not moving. No coercion, no movement. But as you can see, there are many people who we can map across the spectrum that move but might not face coercion. So this could be an internal migrant or someone who's authorized to migrate. Here I'm putting migration studies in conversation with other forms of literature, so tied to refugee studies or conflict studies, which you'll see as I move forward. So internal migrants, authorized migrants, unauthorized migrants, this all falls within migration studies. But then we have people who may face some kind of coercion, but are not able to move. This might include people who are besieged, targeted, in hiding, or folks who are killed at home. This category is really important to include in our analysis because they're often left outside of the scope when we're thinking about refugee issues. Here, I want to invite you to think about if you were part of a refugee family. The folks who may be killed at home, your family members, are of course going to be a part of your experience. But states and humanitarian agencies that are interested in counting the number of people who cross state borders are less likely to take these folks into consideration. So I'm going to just quickly move through this chart so that I can stay within my time limit, but also so that I can make the next point moving forward. So we can map this out in terms of thinking about also people who cross state borders. That includes people who are in open refugee camps, so people who live in camps but can move, or people who are in closed refugee camps like asylum detention centers. And across the board, we continue to take people who are killed in transit or upon return. Again, these are folks that often fall outside of state or humanitarian knowledge production. Now, with the remaining seconds that I have left, I want to show you how and why this chart is useful in beginning to think about non-state-centric solutions. So quickly, I want to introduce you to Waji, who starts off in 2011 as a voluntary non-migrant. He's from Syria in Daraa. He becomes an IDP, internally displaced, moves to an open refugee camp, becomes a resettled refugee, is resettled to Canada, and ultimately becomes an authorized migrant. The chart is useful because it shows us that over time, people can move across these categories, which helps us not ascribe stagnant categories to folks. And in my next 15 seconds, I also want to point out that human beings are parts of families, which means that we might be focusing on Waji in certain kinds of knowledge production. But if you talk to Waji, he has family that remain in the open refugee camp in Zatari, family that are considering becoming asylum seekers because life in, let's say, Lebanon has essentially become unlivable and they're considering seeking asylum in Europe. He has families that remain IDPs. His father was in a besieged ISIS territory, and he has family members that are living in a closed refugee camp and folks who had died as a result of the war. And the reason why it's important to map the family onto this continuum of mobility and immobility is it also pushes us to think about different kinds of interventions and solutions that break outside of the certain norms or categories that we usually use to talk about refugees as access to rights. I will come back to this chart as we continue in our discussion. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Gary. Please, our second speaker, please, Professor Ingura.
Good morning and greetings from Paris and Nairobi. I would want to express my sincere gratitude to APCIU for inviting me to this great conference. And I'm particularly grateful to the Republic of South Korea for initiating the Group of Friends for Solidarity and Inclusion with Global Citizenship. Back in Paris, Kenya is a very active member of this group. It is an alliance of countries that are committed to advancing the principles of GCED. Allow me now to very briefly speak to the long-standing issues of racism and hate speech. But to bring it in context, in the interest of time, I'll give you a few examples that have happened either to me or in my country. I'll start with my experience. I once traveled to China, that was back in 2014. And immediately after going through immigration, just like any other traveler, I was going for an international conference as a university professor. But I realized a few meters from the immigration desk that there were 3 policemen following me, 1 directly behind me, and 2 giving me what I would call a VIP escort. Of course, I felt intruded because I wondered, how come? What is it that is making them feel that I'm dangerous in an international airport? Is it my height or is it my complexion? By the time I exited the airport, because we had arrived very early in Beijing and we were going to another city called Dalian, I decided to pick a taxi and go to a hotel or book a hotel and sleep for a few hours before finishing my journey. But shockingly, I think that was a bad day for me because when we arrived at the hotel lobby, there was a heated argument between my taxi driver and the person serving. And for about 5 minutes, because I don't speak much Chinese, or I don't speak any, I could sense that there's trouble here. Ultimately, he beckoned me and said, let's go. On our way, I asked him, so what happened? And he said, this hotel does not take in Black people. So we need to go back to near the airport where people are more understanding. Of course, I had my few hours sleep, but with so much anger, because I was wondering, what is it that is happening? Let me contrast that with my experience in my very first visit to South Korea, a university called Chungbuk. And there were 3,000 participants in an international scientific conference. And we were very few Blacks, just like we are here. And when the moderator stood up and said, we have people from Africa and specifically from Kenya, we got a standing ovation and a round of applause. You can see the contradiction in terms of feelings when you're being applauded in one space and not celebrated in the other. What are we saying? We are saying that hate speech and racism really can affect citizens at the individual, country, and sometimes even at international level. For hate speech, we've had a very tough time in my country where young people, the Generation Z, have been following through the government and speaking very, very in an agitated way on what they don't want to see. And there are many things that have happened in the X space. And the specific thing that I want to point to at this point is the fact that if a government official, anybody empathetic to the government, stands up and makes a statement that the young people don't like, I was speaking my mother tongue, they ask one another, literally meaning, let's go and greet him, tumsalimie. When you get into that space of being greeted, it's not a greeting, it's hate messages being mobilized across the country on social media to get to you. And that has made people very depressed. What are we saying? We are saying that we have a role to deal with racism at individual, institutional, and even on the multilateral space. And we can do that effectively by pushing the agenda of GCED. I say that proudly because Kenya is one of the few countries that have made significant progress with a competence-based education, which IPCU has significantly contributed to. We can share with you a teacher's handbook that of 94 pages or so that is being implemented. And we are looking forward in the next few years to have a community that will be accommodative and that will display solidarity and inclusion. Let's all join hands together to fight racism and hate speech. Thank you very much.
Very much. Thank you very much. GCED is Global Citizenship Education. I think you all know it aims to empower learners to engage and assume active roles both locally and globally to face and resolve global challenges. It supports learners ultimately to become proactive contributors to a more just, peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, and secure and sustainable world. So we can all be reminded of the importance of GCED after the talk of this issue of hate speech and fighting racism. Now we are turning to the third speaker, Professor Kitahara Hunt, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Realizing how challenging it is to finish the speech within 5 minutes, I'm going to go directly into my point. I think the conference asked me to come because of my background in human security. So admittedly, I started on my research on human security because I was hired by the graduate program on human security. And before that, I was a very much of an accountability human rights justice person in practice and also in research. But if you could, sorry. I was responsible for this, right? So I think the challenges. So first challenge that I see is peace and security challenge in a multilateral circumstances, environment. So I think the geopolitical tensions, breach of norms are not new, but the more apparent breach of international norms are relatively new. Big powers doing that is also on the rise, and big powers guardianship to secure the international peace and security is a threat. And then human rights norms are also challenged. It is not the application of human rights norms. That's nothing new. Always states had problems in applying human rights norms to their own standards, as the keynote speaker spoke a little bit about it. But it's the norm itself that is challenged. That also is not completely new because there were, Western values idea, Asian values idea, colonial idea. But working in a field oftentimes it's the opinion between the citizens and the states are completely different. And I don't buy Western values, colonial values versus human rights. Human rights, there is essentially something universal there. That's my own belief. Then I want to go into human security. So what I would like to suggest is to look at both issues, so peace and security and human rights, in a global value that is easier to engage for everyone. So human security is a people-centered security concept that is linked to sustainable peace, that looks into people, not states. It's human security includes human rights law, international humanitarian law, international refugee law, and it is essentially looking at the objective side of security, but also subjective side of security. So you may feel secure in this conference, but I may not feel secure because I have to speak in front of people. It is subjective. It is also more than just absence of armed conflict or generalized violence. It is looking into private areas as well. And it addresses root causes of conflicts, not only armed conflicts, but all kinds of conflicts. And it is also looking at the machinery, all kinds of machineries, not interstate machineries only, but machinery to solve problems at all levels. So I think there is some use of this concept. The use is to allow discussion on security matters, peace matters, values that are shared in a more comprehensive way, not only states. I think the keynote speaker spoke about the young people, and I completely agree with the importance of young people getting the lead on these issues, because that's their future, and we will try to listen as much as possible. And I'm an optimist, and so I do see a lot of hope in engaging with young students. They have less concern about state boundaries. They have less concern about diversity of cultures. They are more accepting of different types of cultures. I don't have time to go into different types of cultures, but also they are more open to talk about responsibilities of all actors. They are engaged. They don't have much problem in going to protest or, counter argue against professors. I see that in higher education, even in Japan, even in a elite university in Japan that I work for. So I think this conversation, this dialogue space is the most important part, and human security actually includes those actors, those people who are excluded in the beginning. And also it looks into subjective security, so it obliges states and other actors, including ourselves, to ask everybody how they feel. It's about the feeling of how people are. Not only about the norms, not only about the ratification of treaties, but also about feelings. I know that my time is up, so I'll be in a rush to go through that. Also looking into people's lives. It's not only about whether or not entitlements are secured and guarded, but it looks into how they are experiencing it. So that is the discussion that is really vital to guard the common values, global values that I believe in. I think, sorry, that's all I wanted to say, but guarding global values that are multilateral in a true sense, I think is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kitara. And now next is Professor Lee Sang-wook, and he's going to talk about global governance for the ethical development and deployment of AI.
Thank you. Obviously, it's a great honor as well as a daunting task to talk about the AI ethics with respect to the global citizenship education, but I will do my best, okay? First of all, I want to emphasize the recent trend in the AI global governance, which is from principles to action. after 2022, more exactly November 2022, the emergence of so-called generative AI makes many people in the world to worry about the potential risks related to this generative AI. So before that part, there are OECD declaration of the ethical principle and the UNESCO's efforts to make comprehensive ethical consideration on the AI ethics. But they tend to be, presenting the ethical principles and ask many stakeholders to pay attention to these issues. But after this advent of generative AI, we are now in the very fast mood to the establishing AI global governance, which can take care of the trustworthiness and the safety of AI development and deployment. Okay. Secondly, now it's more important for the consideration of fairness in the global AI governance when we actually making this institutional effort to have like a networked AI safety institute among the involved nations after the 2023 Bletchley AI Summit conference, as well as there is a second conference in Seoul last March, which was on this exact same agenda of the ethical and the governance issues. What I mean by fairness issues like this, frankly speaking, the technologically developed countries, mostly big five techs, pioneered the frontier AI development. But the benefits we can get from the AI shouldn't be dominated by these very rich and very industrially developed countries. Actually, what I found quite interesting is many technologically less developed countries has a great interest in AI, although it's a very frontier technology, because they saw the potential of leapfrogging technology in Korean 도약 기술. They think that by participating in the AI development and the deployment, they can actually overcome the technological gap between their countries and more industrially developed countries. So AI is now global issues, and the global governance should be built in the multi-stakeholder approaches and the various ethical and social consideration of every countries in the world, like a UN approach or UNESCO approach. The problem is, at the moment, the global governance is dominated by these very industrially developed countries, and they tend to focus on the various regulation framework, which is essentially good because they try to make sure that the AI development is ethically sound and beneficial to the general public. But these ethical framework tend to be very costly. So I think we should strive to develop a kind of ethical framework or institution which can be implemented by every countries in the world at a lower cost. So this problem of so-called ethical cost is a big obstacle for less industrially developed countries to getting into the discussions and the building of AI governance at the moment. Okay, there is another issue, so-called dual use. Oh, I have 1 minute, so I will just move on to the next topic. There is an issue called AI literacy, and AI literacy has to do with this global citizen the education quite closely. We need to make sure that by using AI, you can augment your capability to do something rather than you are replaced by the AI. So many people find that although AI is extremely useful, if you rely on AI too heavily, you actually lose your skill, your capability to do, to achieve certain things in your own time. This is called de-skill problem. In Korean, 탈숙년 문제. So we have to deal with this kind of skill problem, and the AI literacy and digital literacy should be take into account all those skill problem, as well as the competent mobilization of AI and digital technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have heard all these really pressing, challenging issues that are before us that requires a lot of collaboration. So for the discussion, let me start with a few questions first for each panelist, and then we will open up the panel. First to Dr. Wan, you mentioned about refugee as access. And also there are multiple ways of intervention, not just state, right? So can you explain briefly about how refugee problems are solved out using your case that you presented in more detail?
Sure,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
It's, can I bring the chart back up?
Yeah,
Is that possible?
why not?
All right, we'll see if that. Well, so it's a big question. So how do we solve refugee displacement? And I think that the first point to make is that oftentimes we ask this question coming from a humanitarian perspective, but from my research, and I suppose I should give you a little bit of background, I've been working on refugee issues since about 2010. Most of my empirical work has been in Jordan, and I've conducted over 175 interviews with Syrian refugees, Jordanian citizens, and government and UN and NGO officials. I've also worked with Iraqi, Palestinian, and Sudanese refugees, mostly in the Middle East. And I think coming from that perspective, the first thing to point out is that it's constantly pitched as a humanitarian problem, but we need to always step back and ask ourselves, for whom is refugee displacement a problem? So what kinds of problems are people actually trying to solve? I often tell students, you know, I'm a human rights scholar, I teach classes on human rights, and yet it turns out that when you become a human rights scholar, it's all about studying human rights violations. So much of what, you know, to answer your question, the hard answer to that is actually we're explicitly asking about refugees, but we're searching for solutions that are state-centric. Because ultimately, the refugees can only be beneficiaries when the states are meeting their needs. So let me give you a very concrete example. With the mass migration of refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers to Europe, we saw in 2016 huge amounts of donations to the main refugee host states in the global south. But not all main refugee host states in the global south. So Kenya, for example, did not receive as much money as, let's say, Turkey or Lebanon or Jordan. And Jordan didn't receive as much money as Turkey. So why did these states receive more support for refugee support and management? It's not because their refugee problems particularly more challenging, but it's because containing refugees was also simultaneously one of the problems that states sought to solve, not just providing humanitarian assistance. So one of the challenges for folks who are interested in human rights is constantly thinking about how we are juggling the human rights of individuals, the ways in which members of the host community or citizens are also being affected when it comes to the reception of refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers, and the interests of the states themselves. I would also say, if I'm just throwing out some things for folks to take away, refugee situations are often treated as though they are unprecedented, as though we did not see any of this coming. I think that this is a rhetorical mechanism that is, you know, if I can say frankly, is of folks who are not in a position of power. We know that war will lead to displacement. And so I don't think that it's useful to continuously think of this as an unexpected displacement. And then finally, I feel like I need to mention Gaza, thinking about Gaza right now, and folks who can't even become refugees because they can't be displaced, they can't leave. And then that also brings in questions about what happens when folks do leave, what happens to their right of return. And if we think about the Palestinians who have been displaced throughout those regions, folks who can't and have not been able to return for generations. And I can tell you empirically from my own work, the Palestinians' experiences who I spoke to who were in Jordan or Lebanon or Syria, or folks who, let's say, were displaced to Syria in 48 and then displaced again after the start of the war in 2011. These are folks who, having generational displacement in their background, it shaped how they understood access to rights, the value of citizenship, the value of having a nation state.
Yeah.
And so all of this needs to become a part of the conversation, which frankly falls out of the conversation if we only frame this as a human rights concern and forget how politics shapes people's access and limitations, limited access to human rights in the present and in the future.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
That's a very, very, informative answer. Yeah, we can keep going. Yeah, but due to the limited time, let's go over to Professor and Dr. Ngure. Kenya is the chair country of the Group for Solidarity and Inclusion with GCED. Could you provide information about the activities of this group, particularly in relation to preventing the spread of hate speech among youth?
Thank you for that good question. Yeah, we have the privilege of sharing that group of friends, which I already mentioned was initiated by the permanent delegation of South Korea. This is a group of friends where we meet to do several things. Number one, we meet to campaign against racism, hate, discrimination, among others. We meet together to craft joint statements for the executive board and the conference board, the general conference at UNESCO. These are the highest governance organs at UNESCO. And when such statements are agreed among ourselves and ultimately adopted at the executive board, they become statements that can be used to speak against something or to speak in support of something that would help to alleviate racism, hate, and other vices that we are talking about. Besides that, since inception in 2020 March, we've had several very powerful roundtable meetings. These roundtable meetings have been very critical in building capacity among the delegates and also in cascading different issues that are tackled. For example, there was a roundtable speaking to how the arts in education can be leveraged upon to mitigate issues to do with racism and hate speech. So there are many, many opportunities that we've had, and we continue to get more and more membership. But remember again, this group was created courtesy of the Republic of South Korea, and we grow from one strength to another. And finally, it is through this group that we are able to also participate at such conferences. In every conference that has been organized by your good government, members of the Group of Friends for Solidarity and Inclusion have been very well represented. And that's why I'm here. And for that, we're very grateful.
Thank you very much for the answer. And Professor Aik Dahara-Hunt, can I ask a question about how the concept of human security that you elaborated to us today be useful in multilateral solutions in peace? So can you provide us like concrete examples?
Thank you very much. I think human security is a framework that is not concentrated on legal obligations. So my number one point is that some states are not eager to speak about human rights. Even those states may be eager to speak about human security. Through my project that looked into who actually protected or promoted human rights during COVID, the very first starting point is that states have an obligation, legal obligation to protect human rights. That's number one. But when there was a problem that was kind of sudden and overwhelming, states were not protecting some kind of rights, for example, economic, social, cultural rights like right to education or right to health is the primary issue. So right to work, for example, or freedom of movement. some of those actors who are not traditionally engaged in human rights protection and promotion stepped in to promote and protect human rights. For example, business actors, for example, individuals, for example, cooperatives, students. And these research looking into those practices revealed that actually some of those people, actors, were not doing it under the name of human rights. Some of the actors even said that I really hate human rights. I don't do human rights. I don't want to be human rights activist, and I don't want states to think I'm a human rights activist. I just do want to help people. But essentially what was happening was that they were filling the gap of human rights protection and promotion. So not taking away states' obligation at all, that has to be there, but having multiple actors who are engaged in the area of looking at people's lives, livelihoods. And I think that is right. It is actually as a result, protecting and promoting human rights and protecting people's lives and livelihoods. And for that, if human security is the entry point that people or states are comfortable with, then let be it. I think it is one very strong, powerful idea that will engage people and states to look into human lives and livelihoods. If I may add just one more thing, is that human security engages non-traditional conversations, non-traditional actors, non-traditional conversations. You have to be a little bit careful because human security is used in very different ways. So that I am aware of. But for example, human security, if you unpack documents that were published by the UN Human Security Committee, but also the subsequent development of the idea of human security, it looks into dignity very much, dignity of people, human beings. And dignity of human beings, when you unpack it, there is cultural diversity. I think I talked about subjective security. And related to that, there are, for example, a requirement of having rituals in their own way, or having, for example, funerals in a way that they choose, or thinking about how to deal with dead bodies. That's the same as funeral, sorry. So cultural diversities within this idea of human security. And I think that would probably engage different conversations, different actors who are possibly not eager to do that under the name of human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So basically, it seems that it sort of like casts a wider net, wider net for wider, untraditional actors and people who are maybe having a little sort of like reluctance to join the human rights group, still interested in the promoting of the livelihood of the people in danger as well. Thank you very much. And now the question to Dr. Lee Sang-woo. There are various there are various issues in global AI governance, but what do you think is the most severe problem when it comes to global peace?
Okay, peace is difficult. It's difficult to achieve, but also difficult to understand because many sectors of the global society have a quite different idea of what peace means to them. I think what AI can contribute is to provide a basic, relatively uncontroversial data analysis relating to the peacekeeping activities, as well as various social groups, stakeholders' responses to these peacekeeping activities in the global level. Because you have to have your global discussion based on the relatively uncontroversial, the shared ground truth in computer science technology. Unless you do have this kind of common ground, the discussions about how to achieve the peace tend to just go in a various direction depending on your cultural influence or political interest. So I think that's one possibility. But I'm afraid that what happened in real time in global scale is more to do with the adverse usage of AI in the peacekeeping activities. This is the one of the topic I just didn't mention because of the time limitation. When you have a so-called benign AI, which is built into the various ethical consideration and try to make a really beneficial outcome from, for instance, there are many AI which deals with the finding out the promising candidate for the new drugs. If you change a very, very small part of this benign AI, you can transform this benign AI into a military weapon. That's called dual use problem of AI. And in order to tackle these issues, you have to have a global governance to not just obviously military uses of AI, but also benign AI, powerful enough to be transformed into this really disturbing effects. And one of the key issues of global governance of AI at the moment is how to block this the dual use problem at the global scale. And I think this is not a positive way of contributing to the world peace, but it's a kind of negative way of not making havoc of AI deployment of this dual use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have still a lot of time left. Let me go around just one more round of questions, and then let's open the panel to the floor. For each presenters, let me ask you the same question to each. One is, so what do you think is the most important and required urgent multilateral efforts in your sector? And secondly, what do you think is the most hindrance problems that to achieve that most important multilateral efforts? Oh, okay. All right, sure. Oh, yeah. Shall we start from the other side?
I try to understand this as a very beneficial gesture, okay? Because I didn't prepare much. I just, okay. First of all, I think AI global governance should be truly, genuinely global. At the moment, it's not. It's dominated by the some countries which has greater power in the industrial deployment and the development of so-called frontier AI. In order for this truly global nature of AI global governance to be achieved, we have to have various platform of conversation and institutional settings where various concerns and interests of the many countries in the world to express their concern, and which has to be reflected into this global governance, just as we did, although many people think that it's not entirely successful, but we did in our global governance of climate change. And there is the biggest, as I think, the challenge for this kind of a truly global governance of AI is, I think, what I said before, the ethical cost of AI ethical regulation. I mean, I think every country wants to be ethical in their development and the employment, development and deployment of AI. But if to be ethical is too costly for the less economically developed countries, then there is a possibility that more advanced countries put their ethical burdens to the less developed country and set up their institute at a lower ethical regulation in their school. I mean, that's not really desirable because AI can be spread over the global world by the online. So all this regulation on the governance should be truly global, and we have to lower the ethical cost over this ethical regulation of the AI for the governance to be truly global. Thank you.
Very much. Yeah. So, Dr. Kitahara.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad I'm not the first one. So what is the most important part? I think it is the dialogue. I think there was a quote from Malcolm X, but I don't remember exact wording, but he once said that those people who want war are united for that purpose. Those people who want peace also need to be united to fight against the war. That's what I think is most important, to be united, to have community engagement. Communities need to be diverse. It's not about all states going into a fancy UN conferences. I'm sorry that we are in a fancy UN conference, but it's not only about that, but to engage with all levels and inviting a lot of different actors and different generations. I think what is powerful there is the open-mindedness and thinking outside the box, because the tools that are inside the box doesn't solve the problem now. That's why we have a problem. We need to have a flexible thinking. You know, if there is a rule and norms, what is that for? Is what we need to think about. Who are we trying to protect? Why are we trying to protect? Why is it necessary? If you go back to that, I don't think people would want to be tortured. Anybody want to be tortured, right? I think the thinking need to be outside of, oh, this is how it should be, but how we want to be. Hindrance to that, I think there are a few things. One is obviously the power struggle and this narrative that is created to have a common enemy, and by that having people united in a very rapid way to incite hatred and get together to fight against something else. That is also using the social media platforms, and information goes across the world so quickly, so they can do that very quickly. Why don't we do that quickly as well to counter that, to have the platforms in different ways? It doesn't have to have names even, it can be networks, it doesn't have to be organization. It is less costly to create such networks now because the online platforms are all open across the global environment. In that, I think also important is the critical thinking. In this world of so much information, I was reading an article yesterday about how much information we get, and for non-Japanese it doesn't make sense, but we are getting one day we are getting 1 year of information that people in Edo period received. Edo period is like in 1600s kind of area. So we do need to think about which information we choose, and that critical thinking is very necessary for everyone to have, to judge, to not to be lazy to judge, you know, just not to be surfing on the information, but to actually think, is this correct? Why do I think so? And for that, I truly believe that education is really very, very important. So I think I will finish with a positive note on my remarks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. For fighting racism and hate, I'm fully convinced that the cure for this is to educate people about it. The example given here by UNESCO and Your Good Republic through APCIEU is one of the best examples that can be cited. I was reading the 94-page document, the teacher handbook that is being used currently for secondary schools in Kenya, and I felt a little bit jealous that the people that will be produced through that system will be globally competitive on one hand, but they will not walk out of Kenya or interact with others from the point of ignorance. So the point I'm making there is we need to scale up global citizenship training and education. And for those who may not benefit directly from curriculum development and change, there is need to create awareness. We can leverage on emerging technologies like AI to make sure that citizens of this planet are critically aware of these vices and the harm that they cause. I also want to believe that the multilateral space can be used to pass messages and to lobby towards development of policies that will be standardized to the level that across the 6 continents, we can be able to look at human beings from a human rights perspective, but from the perspective of love and care for one another. The main hindrance for this, of course, is the usual culprit of not having sufficient resources to do this. But to alleviate this, I'm sure the world has much more money than we really think. It's only that we do not prioritize the things that truly matter. And I'm convicted that this is one matter that is very, very urgent, and it will be value for money to invest in it. And of course, you can complement that with volunteerism. Those that are already well-trained in this can volunteer to pass the messages to the rest of us. Thank you.
Thank you for going first on the other side there. You know, I can't help but think about the conversations that we've been having today as I consider how to answer this question. My first thought is to invite people to think about the social construction of a problem. So what is the problem to begin with? When it comes to refugee issues, oftentimes the parameters of that problem, we can maybe begin to understand it by who do we see as a refugee. But if you go back to the chart that I was trying to show you, a person who might, from one perspective, be seen as a refugee could be an international student, could be a person who is an entrepreneur who is allowed to enter a state with dignity and support to potentially build or create a business, who might be able to rely on their networks. My point is that there are actually, one, we can think about what solutions already exist and think about how to bolster them. But I would also venture to think about what other kinds of multilateral engagements exist outside the framework that has been designated as though it exists to support only refugees. And I think especially, you know, just building off of the conversation that with the start of the mobility and mobility chessboard, one thing that I've learned as an ethnographer and a person who does in-depth interviews, I'm sitting with people, I'm talking to them about their families, I'm talking to them about what their personal concerns are. And those concerns are often different than the concerns of states or humanitarian agencies that are interested in alleviating what they see as a problem. So when we're considering what are the potential multilateral solutions, I think we also need to step back and think about what are the concerns that people have. So oftentimes that is about their family back home. That's about family reunification. And since this is a conference that's putting forth education, I don't think that we can underestimate how important education is, not only in terms of one's life course or economic and social mobility, but families, people risk their lives in order to be able to support their children's education. Parents will give up so much in order to support their children's education because this is not just about knowledge, it's about dignity. And I really am very attracted to this word dignity and the role that it plays in our study and understanding of human rights. And I think if that remains the beacon that we come back to, I think that that can help guide how we might consider potential solutions and interventions. How do we recognize other people's dignity in the multilateral solutions that we're introducing?
Thank you. Hindrance? Hindrance? Do you see any major hindrance to the solutions that you think
Oh,
in the current
well,
existing refugee system?
sure,
Which is,
sure.
you know, other than something that you offered.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm
Anti-migrant attitude, for example.
yeah. Well, I building off of the like discriminatory
Mm.
perspectives and actions, I'm curious about what, we're talking about human rights in a universalistic sense, but what happens when some people's rights are pinned against others' rights, whether it's rhetorical or whether it's actual or whether it's narratively constructed? I'm curious about what other folks think about that as well. In terms of hindrance, and then just kind of building off of the earlier conversation around racism and discrimination, as a scholar who works on genocide and building off of a conversation that we were having last night over dinner, genocide is the killing of a race. In all studies of genocide, we study how people are racialized and how that leads to crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and genocide atrocities, right? And so I want to introduce that thought into our conversation because I think it just shows how things can escalate. And in my opinion, I can't help but also be drawn to the conversation about little actions, because whether it's the story of the Chinese man who was driving the taxi and the actions to take you to another place where you would feel welcomed, or how we may intervene when we see racist actions, I just really think that needs to be put in conversation with something as big as genocide, because I do think that these things are connected. And I feel like I'm watching these things unfold in my daily life, whether it's about refugees and migrants or other folks around the world who are striving for their basic human rights.
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear what you all think about that as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I think you can also jump into the questions that Dr. Wan proposed. And also, I think from now on, the floor is open. So you can also join in some of the questions that were raised, issues that were raised here. If you need more concrete examples from different angles, or if you have other perspective to add to the current discussions, we have been covering 4 very big questions about refugee issues, hate speech and racism issues, human security and peace building issues, and also AI governance issues. So anybody from the floor is also welcome as well. Also other panelists. Yeah. Oh. And when you are raising your hands, please identify yourself before you ask questions, please.
Yeah, very good morning. I am Vijayan from NCERT New Delhi. Thank you for your excellent thoughts on various navigation of current challenges in the context of human rights as well as GCED. Thank you all for that. And my specific question is towards Professor Revitalizing. You have been mentioning about the refugees, the challenges of refugees. And my particular question is, we have been talking about nationalism on one hand. At the same time, we have been talking about the humanitarianism on other hand. How these two concepts can be tackled as a challenge, or how we can address this challenge in the context of human rights as well as GCED implementation.
Thank you for your question. And if I understand correctly, the juxtaposition that you're making is, on the one hand, we have nationalism as it relates to ideas of inclusion, belonging, states, and citizenship. And on the other hand, you have humanitarianism, which is explicitly non-political. Is that what you're getting at? And so, I mean, human rights is supposed to be the gap that bridges the two, although oftentimes we see that where human rights cannot be implemented in the ways that one might ideally prefer, people abdicate rights in order to have access to resources or just basic needs. And oftentimes that falls under the umbrella of humanitarianism, right? I think one of the important challenges here is when there is no pathway to full political incorporation. So the vast majority of the world's refugees live in the global South, and they don't and they will never have access to citizenship rights. And so humanitarianism, on the one hand, is kind of like a Band-Aid, but we see that people are disenfranchised for generations. On the other end of the spectrum, you have less than 1% of the world's refugees who are vetted, selected, and then invited to resettle. In countries of resettlement, the number of countries can change from year to year, varying between 27 and 36 countries. However, this is less than 1% of the world's refugees. And so if we empirically look at what's happening in the world, I think it really does pose a challenge to our conversation around rights, because it seems like rights and political incorporation is really only allotted to a very select few on the global scale, while most of the world's refugees, people who are displaced across state borders, must depend on humanitarian interventions. And then in terms of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the Refugee Convention, to whatever extent that gets applied, there's really not let's say, measures that can be held constant from one place to another. And the best concrete example there is that one of the durable solutions, so one of the solutions to displacement as proposed by the UNHCR, is local integration. Okay, so what is local integration? Scholars can give you an answer, but oftentimes local integration looks like one of the greatest problems when it comes to refugee displacement, which is called protracted displacement. So simultaneously, the solution and the problem may look like the same thing and be the same, can be studied in the same situation. So I don't know that that's a good answer for you, other than it colors in the challenges here. And the a really important point to turn there is that if countries did provide, if these countries that host hundreds of thousands, 1 million plus refugees, did provide a pathway to citizenship, the way that the global system is set up is it's likely that donor states would actually abdicate any responsibility, because when refugees become citizens, that means they are no longer the responsibility of the international community that is supporting their humanitarian interventions. And then the impetus gets put on these neighboring states that are taking in this large number of folks and the challenges that they face in terms of education, shelter, in terms of access to work and livelihoods. And so really it's a global problem. And I think that it, again, maybe coming back to the issue around what are human rights and how do we unpack that, I think it's really important not to just dismiss global South states as though they aren't really at the forefront in terms of actually providing people with their rights and needs, even though they might not be legal rights or full incorporation like we see in states of resettlement.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from the back, please? There's a lady from the back. Oh, and gentlemen from the middle side as well.
Hello, my name is Laura. I'm a graduate in international relations. First of all, thank you for your presentations. And I have a question also for Mrs. Arar, if you wouldn't mind, which is a bit related to your previous answer. I was wondering about your opinion and maybe potential solutions to the fact that refugees and migrants, I feel, are treated more in a kind of crisis context. Like we approach it from, oh, this is a punctual problem that we have to deal with kind of urgency measures. And I feel like this is part of the problem why they would not be integrated. Like you were talking about local integration. And I feel like that would be part of a more durable approach, and to see migration and displacement not as something that happens punctually, but as something that is part of our current world. And especially I was thinking with the effects of climate change, which is also going to drive migration. So I guess my question is, yes, how do you see this kind of like crisis versus systemic issue kind of distinction? And then how would you recommend, like, what would you recommend to kind of push governments and other authorities to have a more, let's say, stable and kind of regular global approach to refugees and migration? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall we collect more questions a little bit more? There was a gentleman from the middle. Yeah.
Firstly,
Can you identify
I
yourself?
thank for your presentation. Now is my question. I'm from Bangladesh. My question is, climate change is now a global issue. Climate refugee. My question is climate refugees is threaten the world?
You mean
Uh,
why the climate issue is not included here?
The climate issue, when climate refugee, I say climate refugee
Climate
is
refugee.
climate refugee is threaten the world.
Oh, okay. One more question and we will go over again. Yeah. Yeah. There. Oh, three more. Yeah. Can you, gentleman in the middle and lady here, and there was somebody here. Yeah. Okay. And then we will go to the answers. Can you identify yourself, please?
Okay, so thank you very much for the uh, panel discussions. So my name is Mao Serun. I'm from National Institute of Education, Cambodia. So I'm very interested in the idea of gathering common values, which has been presented by Professor Kiara, the director at the Research Center for Sustainable Peace. And you mentioned three ideas which can be the hindrance of human security. One is what we call political tensions, break norms, and big power guardianship. So my question is that, so what are the future possibility or feasibility in dealing with this issue so that we can promote human security and peace in our world? Okay.
So who,
thank you.
Yeah. Hi. Who do you want to answer the
This
question?
question is given to Professor Kihara from
Okay.
the
Okay, from University of
Yeah,
Tokyo. All right. And then there was this lady, and then there was a gentleman over there. Oops, it's growing. Just after the lady, just one more question, and we will have to go to the answer.
All right. Thank you so much for the presentation. Ms. Rawan, I have just a quick question. My name is Barbara Nachijova. I'm from Uganda, and I'm a monitoring and evaluation officer. We have seen an experience where the massive influx of refugees into a country can spark conflict within the host communities. And I wonder if you have maybe a few strategies on how best we can address this without, encroaching on the rights of the host communities, but also protecting the refugees as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one more question, and we will, I don't know, yeah. I think there was a gentleman who raised first, but I don't see him, so, is that you? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, very good morning. My name is Oshan. I'm from Sri Lanka. I'm a practitioner in peace education. So my question would be more directed towards Dr. Kihara Hunt. The human security concept, of course, we can see it as a very powerful tool when addressing certain harms towards humanity, when the human rights are being not respected or not acknowledged much. But I'm also wondering, can this human security concept itself be exploited by certain actors, especially when it comes to cross-border conflicts and armed conflicts? And if that's the case, how can we navigate through it in order to not further threaten the sustainable peace that we try to achieve? So that's my question.
Thank you very much. So shall we go briefly for the answers? And then I remember there were two ladies and one gentleman.
I'll just provide a quick answer, and I'm sure it won't be satisfactory. So please, let's talk after the panel a bit more. But one way to connect all of the questions that occurs to me is, what would happen if we asked those questions but did not use the word refugee or migrant? How might studies of poverty, of inequality, of feelings of belonging or non-belonging, or even reconsidering what is a problem, what's the construction of a problem, how might we broach the answers to those questions if we didn't just provide certain kinds of boundaries around this category of refugee? So for example, I'm thinking about how the last question around the relationship between refugees and the host community. Is this really just about refugee newcomers, or is it about a certain kind of scarcity? Is it a certain kind of international intervention or a gap between promises versus implementation? Is it about hierarchies on the global scale and how they play out on the ground? Or thinking about the urgency of refugees versus migrants. I mean, the truth is that all of us, most of us, have migratory histories in our backgrounds. And so I think that there, at least as a first step in de-exceptionalizing and taking away the framework of urgency, not because it's not useful in the sense that it doesn't describe sometimes there is a need, an immediate need, but that framework of urgency is playing a kind of racializing or othering perspective, excuse me, that allows for certain kinds of downstream interventions or ideas. And so I think that would be my first framing, which I think also ties to the climate change question as well, because I don't think that we necessarily have to see refugees and migrants as a problem. And just quickly, there's Kira Boss has a program, I believe, called Migration with Dignity, in which they're preparing for the perspective that people will have to leave because of rising seawaters. And so there's a training, an educational program to train abroad, I believe in New Zealand, although somebody should Google and check this. But the idea is that we can see that challenges are on the horizon. We don't have to always put ourselves in a position of frames of urgency that then will potentially put people in at the bottom of these hierarchies that we've created in society that are also around race, class, sexuality, and all different kinds of isms that already exist. If I can.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Dr. Hunt.
Okay, for the answer. Okay. Okay. So if I can try to answer the first question about the future possibilities to deal with peace, I think one thing that we need to do is to not to only look at the Security Council and then give up hope. Security Council is divided, and then there's the end of the international peace and security is what all my students say when they come to the first class. That's not the end of multilateralism. There are, recently I am engaging with a lot with the humanitarian sector of the UN and other humanitarian workers. They are actually providing a lot of base. They're doing a lot of work to have a foundation for peace and to have secure the space for communication and to protect people. I think we need to diversify where we look at for solutions, and I think it's not the end of the world to have a the current status of the Security Council. Then what was the other one that I was going to answer? Yeah, the education. Okay, so human security, so can it be exploited? Absolutely, and states do. Some states will convert that conversation of human rights into human security and then focus on development and economic and say, okay, we spend this much money and our economic status as a state has gone up a lot. That's not human security because they are looking at state-centered thing. They're not looking at people. If you look at those states, if you look at the inequality in those states, oftentimes the inequality has increased quite a lot. 2023 was the year 2023 was labeled by World Bank the year of inequality. The increased inequality that started, partly started in COVID times, have increased. It hasn't gone back to before. So yes, absolutely, they can be exploited. How do we do this? How do we try not to do that? I think it's to have the framework of obligation not to be moved. Obligation part is obligation part. That cannot be diversified. No, that cannot be replaced by human security framework. Human security framework is an entry point for conversation. It is the means to invite other people to have different ideas, to have conversation, and also to make a platform to pressure states to deliver their obligations. So I think there is a way, but I think these kind of conferences to exchange ideas is really very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I remember there was 3 questions, 2 ladies and 1 man. Yeah. First lady in the back, and then the gentleman, and then the lady again. We have 1 minute for that question. I think we have time to 43, right? 12:43.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Seema Sheikh from Mumbai, India. So I have a question regarding the AI. Today we see that there is a lot of fear factor amongst the educators, especially in a country like India, where there is a lot of ignorance and lot of misunderstanding about AI, and especially the misuse of AI which has been done. So teachers have a lot of feeling that and educators that they will be replaced by AI. So this is leading to a lot of peace and unrest. There is because of this ignorance. So how can we create safer AI institutes, and how can we create ethical framework, especially for the middle school and the high school institutions, where teachers can be directed in the right way? Because we find that there is so much of unrest, there's so much of displeasure among teachers and students, and a lot of conflicts are happening because of this. So how can this issue be resolved? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then the gentleman, please. Time is up, so let's move quickly. I heard there, yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is George de la Cruz from the Philippines, and my question goes to Professor Wook. And the question is, how can society ensure that the benefits of generative artificial intelligence are distributed fairly rather than exacerbating existing inequalities? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then there was a lady. Actually near, yeah, who raised first.
Good afternoon. My name is Nelly. I come from Kenya. I work as a school principal, have done that for over 30 years. And my question is to I'm here as an alumni of APCEIU as well. My question is to the university professors, those who are serving in the university, Professor Rawan, and also to our friend from the AI industry. As an educator who has been with students and still is, I feel like the landscape in education is really changing. And Professor Osler mentioned in the morning that young people are fighting back against injustices. This is true. It's happening in my country. It was very sporadic. It really brought the country to a standstill. And every time you engage with them, you realize that they're beginning to have their own definition of multilateralism, because they are coming together and pulling forces across the country using AI to really speak in one voice and really fight whatever it is they're finding that is unjust to them. So as we sit in this kind of audience, I respect the fact that we have very many different agencies. I just wanted to find out, what is your take in terms of the education of global citizens, GCED education values in your areas of designation? Are you finding the same reactions, a lot of questioning, a lot of rising up of pressure with the young people? Because the multi-sectoral approach in teaching of GCED I think from where I work is extremely important. So what's your take? What's happening in the higher institutions? What is your take in terms of how urgent should we have everybody teaching in education and working in education deliver this aspect in every sector?
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have 5 minutes left to this whole session. So shall we start with the AI question? You have several questions.
Okay. First of all, I think this conference has a close relationship with UNESCO. So I think we have a quite good reference to which you can actually refer for your questions. There is a report by UNESCO, I think it was published in 2022, concerning about not just the AI ethics in general, it's a recommendation of AI and education for policymakers. So it surveys various aspects and various problems and future directions for policymakers to make sure that AI is used efficiently and fairly in the educational system. So I strongly recommend you to consult that document. Main point of that document and also my own take on this issue is we have to realize first, AI has a great potential, but it has many limitations as well. For instance, this fact, the AI, although it's a kind of intelligence, it's a very different intelligence from human intelligence, has to be emphasized in the older education framework. So, for instance, you can show that by just giving some very short prompt, generative AI can produce a very nice illustration. But you can also point out to your student that your command is not entirely taken up by the AI. For instance, you ask the 3 dogs in the picture, but there could be 4 dogs, or the dogs has just 2 legs. I mean, this kind of limitation, hallucination, is not completely erasable because of basic feature, technological feature of transformer architecture. So by pointing out this great productivity and the limitation, you can tell your student that AI is a great tool, but it's not something which can stand alone. You have to work with it, and you have to examine the correctness and validity of the AI product, and the desirable relationship between you and AI is a collaboration between 2 kinds of intelligence, rather than you are replaced by the AI in the future. And this is not just a pipe dream. I mean, if you look at the industry where AI is heavily used, apart from the really repetitive and very basic procedures, AI is not completely replaced human beings. It's usually the case that many people are complemented by the AI deployment, and they can actually raise their productivity. So I think the general consensus among experts in this area is you emphasize so-called augmentation of human capability in use of AI, rather than replacement of a human being by AI. So that's the first point. And second point is AI at the current point is open compared with electricity or the water technology, because it's a multi-purpose technology which has a great potential to contribute to the well-being of humankind. But many economic historians and very famous economists like Acemoglu in Harvard University emphasize that the potential of a certain innovative technology such as AI cannot be automatically guaranteed to produce such a race of human being welfare. You have to have a right governance to control the powerful people to monopolize the benefits of this innovative technology. And it was verified, this kind of claim was verified throughout the history for the introduction of agriculture and so many other innovative technologies. So I think what we should emphasize in AI education is not just how to use AI itself, but also have a critical stance to how to build AI for the future, better the well-being of the all humankind rather than the small minority of the humankind. And I think that should be the main focus of AI literacy in AI education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there was a little question to you. I think the time is up. Maybe you can communicate 10 seconds to answer.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I think it's an excellent question about students and teaching. And I can tell you that being a teacher is it's the greatest privilege of my life. I have a class on citizenship, migration, and rights with 150 students. I like to call it my Beyonce class because it's, a lot, there's a lot of performance there. And I think there's two points that I want to make. The reason, at least for me personally, why teaching has been such a privilege is because I've had the chance to sit with young people who say, wait, that's not right. This thing that's happening in the world, this is not right. Why? Why is this happening? That's incredibly radical. That is a radical question, and their responses are radical acts. And then the question for me becomes, how do I support somebody who's questioning how to live in a better world, how to create a better world? And I think the other side of that goes back to something that Professor Osler had pointed out about students being worried about grades and tests and the anxiety and the challenges that they have gone through since the pandemic, the wars, global anti-Blackness, racism that we are seeing unfold on their phone screens. I find that my radical act in response to that is to provide a belief in their own and a respect for their dignity, for their questions, for their own exploration and unpacking. And I think that that actually is the best thing that I have to offer. And they're the ones who are essentially fortifying themselves and taking the time to ask these questions. Their moral clarity has been the most encouraging and life-giving thing I have seen this last year. And I hope that all of you have a chance to be around students and know that your work in education is supporting, hopefully, the larger move in that direction.
Thank you very much. Time is up. And let's not forget that, there is this right to narrate, right to speak, and then people can do little things in little places, in little methods, and we can change the world. So don't forget to talk to the young people and multilateral collaboration. So thank you very much for joining the session.
Yes, thank you, our panelists and the moderator for their thought-provoking discussions. I believe through this plenary session, we have had a valuable time gaining practical insight into the multifaceted challenges that exist in the current world and how we might address these pressing issues through collective efforts as an effective solution. We have now come to the end of our morning session. We have even more exciting participatory sessions and breakout workshops prepared for the afternoon. So let's return to the room, energized after lunch. Please enjoy the lunch prepared in the lobby area. And we will resume our second plenary session entitled Storytelling for Peace at 2 p.m. sharp. Thank you.